Right, would you ask Mr. Dixon to come in again, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Dixon, ready to carry on?
Yes. Yep.
Good. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Grahame.
Yes, thank you. Just to pick up on one point from this morning's evidence, you said that when you were considering with Ryden how to overcome the problem of the bowing, that there might have been a number of scenarios. I think you said there might have been half a dozen other scenarios you thought about. Can you help us as to what those other scenarios in general terms were?
I'm not even sure we trialled any others in the end. I think what we did was we probably thought through it logically. We might have pack some plasterboard on the back or some ply packers across, or all of those. And I think the issue might have been that we couldn't get them under compression enough to stay in place.
Yeah.
Hence why the Celotex was used.
I see. Yeah, that's helpful. So turning on now and staying with the story chronologically, we're turning now to your quotations that you provided in the method statements. So if we can turn up RYD 30040686. So we can see this is an email from you to Mr. Marriott at Ryden, it's copying in Simon O'Connor and Simon Lawrence on the 6th of May 2015, and the subject is price for window surrounds. And you say, "Dear all, please find attached the quotation for carrying out the window surrounds at Grenfell. Can I ask you to check the numbers as I'm unsure about the 3-bed units as we've never been in one and the drawings are not clear. Adam, I know this is nowhere near your allowance, but I've looked at this for a few hours now and believe that even our costs might be tight. The team I was hoping to use wants considerably more money than I've allowed due to the risk element, so I've built a team using mostly employees to tackle this, which gives me more flexibility if we have access issues on site." You see that there?
Yes.
So just picking up on a few points from that paragraph, you seem to know that the price you're quoting here is nowhere near the allowance that Ryden have allowed for. Does that mean that Ryden had told you how much they'd allowed for in their budget?
I think it would have been discussed at some point to say that we've got a budget set at this. They'll give you an indication of where it's going, because in a lot of the time, if there is a case that happens, some people just turn around and say, well, I'm not interested in doing it. I can't get anywhere near those figures. Yeah. We saw the process through because we was asked to, so we produced the price anyway.
Yeah. And can you help us? I mean, you might not be able to remember specific figures, but by how much approximately did it exceed Ryden's budget? Was it by a significant amount?
I think so, but there's probably more to the point that I've seen documents since then that bounded a figure about between 90 and something £1,000 was their budget, and I think we was at 132,
right,
around about that figure. So there was a significant difference. Yeah,
thank you. That's helpful. So if we can turn to that quotation that you attached to this email, this is RYD 30088957. Did you put this quotation together yourself?
I did.
Yeah. And we can see on the left-hand side, there's a column for description of item.
Yep.
And if we look, the first item is remove existing frame. So is that remove the existing wooden window frame?
I think it was the inner frames. I think, if I remember rightly, the windows were built out as you had an outer aluminium frame, and inside of that were two other windows that sit in there. So you kind of dismantle the frame.
Right.
So I think, to my recollection, that part of the frame still remained.
Yeah.
It was fixed in place, and that gave us something to actually fit the board up against the new window frame and the old window frame.
Yeah, I see. So it says there, remove existing frame, place plasterboard backer to gain margin. So what's that bit?
At that point in time, this was when this was done.
So this is 6th of May.
Yeah, when this was done, I'm saying to them, I need the flexibility just in case I've got a different scenario. So I might cut pieces of plasterboard in to bridge the gap and put it on that, or we may go back to the insulation. So I think that just gave me the flexibility to do one or the other.
I see. So you've written in that top box, place plasterboard backer to gain margin and close cavity. And then in the row that's filled in below that, row 5, you've got place Celotex insulation to reveals, and should that be base of window?
It should be, yes.
Yeah. So are you saying that what you were proposing in this quote was was either one of those options, either plasterboard or Celotex, or are you saying that it was both?
No. I think it gave me the flexibility to move in and about of either one of those options. As it was then, we didn't use the plasterboard at all. And the original sample never used the plasterboard. And I think actually in my statement that was offered as well, it's highlighted in there that comment there should have been taken out of the second quote.
Yes, I was going to come to that later.
Yep.
So I understand that. But just thinking back to when you put this quote together, were you contemplating that you might use plasterboard backer and some Celotex insulation?
Or a combination of both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we can see you've place Celotex insulation there.
Yep.
What Celotex insulation did you have in mind when you wrote this?
It was no more than a 25mm Celotex. It was more to do with the thickness. We only had a very small margin to work with to actually be able to place something in there. And it was there, the Celotex was there, because it could be put under compression, but it could also act as a support, as well as giving some sort of thermal benefit as well.
I see, yeah. So would there have been a particular Celotex product that had the right thickness that you had in mind?
The 25mm, yes,
Yeah.
I think it's a TP10, or it was a very basic one. Its criteria was nothing more than for us to have a back into the board to stop this bowing.
Yeah, that's helpful. And again, did this quote envisage that you would be placing the plasterboard stroke Celotex insulation all the way around the window, so not just at sill level but also jambs and head?
Yeah, you're going to have to do that. The problem, except that the gap was the same, so the detail would have had to have been the same.
Yeah, no problem. And then if we can turn to another document that I think you provided at this time. This is a risk assessment and method statement. This is SDP 50198. So I think the date of this document is the 19th of May 2015. Yes, we see that. Actually, that's the start date it's got on here. And the issue date. So does that mean this would have been issued then? The 19th of May?
Normally issued a week before, but sometimes a few days before, depending on how much pressure we're under.
And had Ryden told you that they wanted a risk assessment and method statement from you?
That's standard. Everybody does that.
Yeah. And we can see it's there's reference to SDP Solutions in the top right-hand box. Is that another trading name for SD Plastering?
It is, yes. In a lot of instances now, we use SDP Solutions because we're multifaceted, and certainly as we've built the business, plastering, if you won't get some inquiries of sometimes if you're just known as a plastering company. So the solution is just a brand name.
Yeah. Mr. Dixon, you're speaking quite fast, and I think the transcriber may occasionally just struggle. So could you try and speak a little bit more slowly? Sorry. So if we look here under scope of works, at the bottom of that page, we've got a box for scope of works, and it says install and make good Flowplast, soffit and fascia board around window reveals. So that's the UPVC, isn't it?
Yes.
And then you've got board is to be cut and stuck using adhesive and all gaps made good with mastic. So that's about how you're going to stick that board around the edge, yes?
Yep.
And then you go on to say operatives must make all cuts within communal areas. Can you help us as to why there isn't any reference here in this document to Celotex insulation or any other form of insulation board being placed in the cavities around the window frames?
It's a pretty generic document. That's the short of it. These are where we do these now. These are vastly different to how they looked X amount of years ago. So there's a lot more detail in them now.
Yeah, and that's why there's no reference to plasterboard either.
There's no other reason than that.
I see. And can you help as to why the risk assessment and method statement doesn't make any mention of the fire resistance or fire performance of any of the materials that were proposed for use around the windows?
No more reason than we wasn't asked to provide anything that had a certain resistance or offered a certain compartmentation line or anything like that. There was no guidance in saying these are the things you can't use or these are the things you have to use.
Yeah.
I think with all of this, whether it be the Celotex in the reveals or the plastic or anything else, there was ample opportunity to inspect every stage of this
Yeah.
and to highlight that if there was something that didn't quite fit or wasn't up to the expectation of everybody, to stop, start again, and then prescribe something else as a solution.
In your experience, would it be usual not to get any form of specification for the products being used from a design and build contractor like Ryden?
You'd normally expect to see more detail than this.
Yeah. At around this time, did you or anyone else at SDP discuss the size and shape of the gaps with Ryden in terms of
Not
the
particularly.
vulnerability to fire spread or anything like that? No. And was this risk assessment and method statement provided to the installation team for them to work from?
Yes.
Yeah. And you've talked a few times about potentially applying compression to the insulation. Can you just explain what that process would involve? Is it just pressing down on the UPVC to push down?
No,
or is there
no,
something...
quite the opposite. So what you have is you've got the new window frame and you've got the existing inner line, whether that be the window frame or the back of the board. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we would try and do is cut the insulation that is oversized for the opening, so that when you push it in, you have to force the other side in,
Yeah.
which then in turn keeps it under compression.
I see. Yeah, I understand. And were operatives specifically informed that they had to do it under compression to fit it that way?
Well, it wouldn't have wanted to stay in place otherwise.
Yeah.
We'd have had the same problem. It would then tilted further into the cavity, and then we'd have ended up with the same problem we had before.
Yeah. And just for completeness at this stage, and we'll come back to this later, now what we know is that following your first quotation on the 6th of May, we can see a revised quotation was then sent on the 29th of May 2015. If we can just pull that up now, this is SDP 50189. If we blow that up. So this is the revised quotation. And is it right that this revised quotation included for some boxing in work adjacent to the front doors of the flats?
Yes.
But it didn't change the scope or sequence of work to the window surrounds?
Correct.
Yeah. Can I check, was SDP ever provided with any drawings, either from the architect or from Ryden, to assist with carrying out these window surround works?
Not to my knowledge. And again, if there had been a set of drawings and it showed something different, that's what would have been constructed on site. And even if there had been an error in one, there wouldn't have been an error in every flat.
So you say, not to my knowledge, again, if there had been a set of drawings and it showed something different, that's what had been constructed. Were you ever aware of a set of drawings which addressed the way in which these window surrounds should be constructed? No. Did you or anyone else at SDP, to your knowledge, ever have a discussion about the design of these internal window surrounds with Studio E, the architect on the project?
Not to my knowledge.
Were you even aware that Studio E were involved when you were carrying out this work?
Yes.
Did you ever come across Studio E as part of your other work on the project?
There may have been some correspondence somewhere along the line, but normally the idea is that if I want to correspond with any sort of design issue, my line is into Ryden's and then Ryden's back out again to the architect and then from the architect back in and back out to me again.
Yeah.
We don't go around the back of that,
no.
that product.
But to your knowledge, you don't think you had any discussions with it at any stage with Studio E?
If they were, they may have been on site. I may have met 2 or 3 of them. I have no idea, but not to my knowledge.
Yeah. What about with Harley? We know they were doing the works on the exterior, including applying the UPVC membrane around the windows. Did you ever have any discussions with them about the interface between your work and their work?
No. I think there was, at the very early stages, there was just a bit of sequencing when they took out the glass from the windows.
Yeah.
But that was with one of their team supervisors, but no more than that.
Yeah. And did you ever produce any drawings yourselves of the work that was going to be carried out to these window surrounds?
No, I don't believe so.
Now, just a little bit more on the contractual arrangement between you and Ryden. It's correct, isn't it, that prior to taking on the work to refurbish the window surrounds, SD Plastering was awarded a contract by Ryden to undertake the dry lining and plastering works at Grenfell Tower.
Yes.
If we can turn to RYD 3031801, this is an email from 17th of February 2015 from Adam Marriott to you at SD Plastering, copying in a number of others at Ryden, and its subject is Grenfell Tower dry lining package. And he says, Mark Simon, further to your quotation of November 2015 and our subsequent discussions, we attach our letter of intent for the dry lining package required at Grenfell Tower. Do you think that's a mistake in the date there? He's saying 14th November 2015. Do you think he perhaps meant 2014 for that, given that this is an email in February 2015?
I'm unsure.
Okay. Now, what we can see here is that there's a letter of intent sent for the dry lining package, and a number of other documents are sent, including Ryden's standard terms and conditions. They're at Appendix B, and they're one of the attachments. Now, if we can turn up those standard terms and conditions, this is at RYD 3031806. So these are their standard terms and conditions. It was Appendix B that you were sent. Do you recognise this document?
As much from my time at Ryden's as I do from the actual, this part of the tender.
I see. So this would have been standard terms that for subcontractors.
Depending on what type of package, they change slightly, but yes.
Yeah. If we can look on at page 4, at paragraph 2.18.1, it says there's all workmanship is to comply with the following, and then it says all workmanship is to comply with all manufacturers, suppliers, instructions and recommendations and current relevant British standards and code of practice. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So we can see that you were provided with those terms and conditions in relation to the dry lining work. But my question for you is, did you understand that SD Plastering was required to comply with these same standard terms and conditions when they were carrying out work to the window surrounds?
It applies across every piece of work, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They would ask you to try and comply with anything, any of the standards, anything else. Not necessarily knowing what every single standard is. The fallback position for that is that you have a design team in place, you have a management team in place, you have building control in place. So there's all these faults that if someone does make a mistake or doesn't quite understand what it should be, this can be picked up by another party.
I see. So I think what you're explaining there is it would have been implicit that your work had to comply with any relevant standards. Is that right?
You would have thought that any work that anybody does, if there's a standard for it, that's the compliance.
Yeah. But did you actually ever think about and apply your mind to whether these standard terms and conditions also applied to the work you were doing to the window surrounds?
Look, at the end of the day, they're always in the back of your mind that there are standard conditions that you need to work to. So if this was, if that would have been an instruction, it would have still fallen under the main contract. So these conditions would have still been part of that.
I see. That was your understanding at the time?
I think that's my understanding now. I think, and the same for everything. Every element of work you do, if there's a BS for it, although it might not be written down, we've all got a duty of care to try and comply to those.
Yeah. Now, in Mr. Hughes's witness statement, Mr. David Hughes's witness statement, he says that SD Plastering also did a large number of additional works such as screeding, fire stopping and fireproofing.
Yes.
For the transcript, that's in his statement, RYD 3094213, page 9, paragraph 44. Did SD Plastering undertake any fire stopping and fireproofing work at Grenfell Tower?
Yes, on the lower levels.
Can you just explain what that involved at the lower levels?
Penetrations, internal penetration. So between walls. So when we created a wall, if someone penetrated a wall at the top, we would then fill it with the appropriate mastic and that to make sure that that line was reinstated.
Yeah. And in terms of the individuals that carried out that work, would they have been the same individuals that were then used for the window surrounds?
Not necessarily, no.
No, okay. If we can just turn to an email. This is RYD 3064707. This is an email. I want to go down to the third email in the chain. That's at the bottom of that page. It's an email from Jason North, who's one of the Ryden site managers, to you, copying in David Hughes, about Grenfell Tower. And if we look in the first line, second sentence, so he says, hope all well with yourself. Do you think you can stretch to supplying our good selves with the following? And then he says, somebody qualified for fire stopping. This is to include all penetrations, etc., removal and replacing of panels. Can you just help us, when he says there, someone qualified for fire stopping, what did you understand him to mean by that?
Experienced. Someone who's got some sort of experience in it. Doesn't mean necessarily qualified. At that stage in time, most people working within fireproofing were someone that had actually been on one of the product courses, so you understand how to install the product.
Yeah.
And that's kind of qualified. Since then, obviously, things have changed quite dramatically, and qualified means something very, very different.
Yeah. Now, when you were carrying out the window reveal work, were any of your workmen required to have particular qualifications or training in terms of the work that was being done?
No, and again, it was seen as nothing more than a cosmetic detail. So the skill base for that is slightly different. It's someone who can install the elements that went in. They didn't need to be qualified as a fire technician. They didn't need to be qualified as a surveyor or anything else. That's the limitation of that task.
Yeah, okay. Now, I just want to come on to some more detail about the choice of materials used in the window surrounds. Simon Lawrence said in his oral evidence to the inquiry that he didn't know who had selected the insulation materials to be used, but he thought that you would have gone away, looked at your supply chain to find out what rigid insulation would fit in the thickness that was needed before choosing where to get the materials from. That was his evidence. Would you agree with that that's what happened in practice?
Yeah, there would have been quite a few discussions about that material, and certainly would have had a sample on site at some point. So it may be that we've gone away and looked at availability, but I think there's also an email from Simon prior to this concerned in the sample window that he actually mentions that the other team had fitted Celotex. So there is a reference already to that much earlier on.
So is your evidence that the selection of materials was based on agreement between Ryden and SDP as to what the appropriate rigid insulation board would be for those locations?
Yeah, I don't think there was anything to say that the materials that we used on site and put in place for people to inspect, there was nothing to say that that wasn't the case not to use them. Yeah.
Now, we know that the insulation used by SDP in the window surrounds was either 25mm Celotex TB4000 insulation boards or 25mm Kingspan Thermopitch TP10 insulation boards. Is that correct?
I would suggest that's correct.
Yeah. Now, at the time of the Grenfell project, were you generally aware of the requirements in the building regulations?
Not in particular this, because we didn't take on a design element of this, so we'd not done anything at this height.
Yeah.
So the regulations within refurb and new build, they're very different and they're very open to interpretation. That's one of the biggest problems.
Yeah.
So what we was guided by was saying, look, this is what we're going to do. Can someone give us formal agreement that we can continue?
Yeah.
And that's exactly how it was put together.
Yeah, so you were looking to others on the project to tell you if there were any compliance issues with what you were proposing.
The guidance on refurbishment is, as I say, is quite hazy in some areas. So the whole point of that is that you put it through a chain of command, including the design teams, the client, building control, and my understanding is that everybody had looked at that, everybody had agreed that and said we can proceed on that basis.
When you're saying your understanding is that everybody had looked at that, are you saying that everybody had seen precisely which insulation products you were proposing to use, the Celotex and the Kingspan, and your understanding was that all of those people in that chain were happy with that?
My understanding is that everybody knew what we was doing.
And you referred there to the design team. Did you ever have a discussion with Studio E about this specific insulation products? No. And building control you also referred to. Would building control have been made aware of the products you were using in that location?
I can only assume so.
But you don't have any direct evidence of that in terms of...
No.
You weren't on site when there was a building control visit?
No, but only on the basis that we was allowed to continue.
I see. Yeah. We'll come back to that topic, I think, a bit later. Were you aware of any of the guidance in approved document B on fire safety at this time?
Not at this time.
Were you aware that there was some specific guidance for buildings over 18 metres in terms of the types of materials that could be used on them?
In a new build situation, yes, but not in a refurb situation.
So was it your understanding that if you were refurbing a building, an existing building, that if that was a tall building, there wasn't any particular requirements surrounding it?
My understanding was that there was a design team in place, building control in place, to ensure that if there was a regulation in there or if it was open to interpretation, that was brought to site, and then if there had been anything within the detailing that they wasn't happy with, that it could be stopped, rectified before it continued up through the building.
Yeah. But I'm asking you about your knowledge. Did you have any knowledge at the time that there might be special rules for a refurb if that building was over 18 metres?
No, I didn't.
Were you aware that that guidance provided that any insulation materials used in an external wall were required to be of limited combustibility?
No.
Had you ever heard of the term limited combustibility at the time of the Grenfell project?
Yes.
In what context had you heard about that?
It would just rose up in countless conversations, whether it been a technical, it could have been, it was normally to do with insulation anyway, and it might have been on a previous scheme somewhere in a new build situation rather than a refurb, because even in a lot of new builds, they were still installing phenolic insulation on the outside of buildings, which is now something that's not done anymore. So that term would have probably come from a new build rather than a refurb.
Yeah, and you're quite sure that was the term limited combustibility, are you?
I can't be certain, but I've certainly heard it before, and I've certainly heard it quite a while ago.
And if you'd heard that term at the time, what would you have understood that to mean?
That means whatever product is put in there should have some sort of fire rating and doesn't add to the fire.
Yeah. Did you think there was any guidance which might apply in terms of fire safety to the internal works that you were doing to the windows at Grenfell Tower?
Now, what I'd actually assumed is that the process had already been done, that the strategy was achieved, which means that everybody knew exactly what was required, where it was required, and the safety to ensure that nothing is missed is that a site management team, a building control officer, and Studio E have the ability to sign those off and say, we're happy with what's being done. Yeah. The overall strategy is the key.
Yeah. You say there that what you assumed is that the process had already been done, but I think you agreed that it was you that first suggested the Celotex. Is that right?
No, what I actually said was Simon Lawrence had already identified in an earlier email that Celotex had been placed by somebody else. We probably replicated that.
I see. And the Kingspan product, was that something that you chose yourself?
I think the Kingspan only came about because there was no availability of Celotex at the time.
Yeah.
But they perform almost the same.
But did you take the decision to swap the Kingspan in because you thought it was a like-for-like product?
Oh, I think probably Andy would have contacted me at some point and said, there's no Celotex, can I get a Kingspan? And I would have said yes.
Yeah. And who's the Andy you're referring to?
Andy Cole.
Yeah. Were you aware at the time that there was guidance, including in approved document B, that provided that cavity barriers had to be installed around window openings to prevent the spread of fire from a compartment into any external wall cavity?
No.
Had you ever been involved in a project where cavity barriers had been installed around windows or other fireproofing around windows?
In a new build situation, yes.
Yes. And what was that new build situation? What kind of?
It's a block of flats. It was 6 stories high, and we installed the barriers on the outside as well. So as part of our works, we'd install the insulation, the barriers around the windows, But that, again, that is a new build situation, not
Yeah.
a refurb situation.
And just help us as to, in that new build situation, what were the barriers that you were installing around the windows? Were they cavity barriers?
They were vented barriers. So these were actually a product by Fire Firm, so it's their vented system.
Right, yeah. Did you ever consider the fire performance of the materials that you were installing around the windows?
No, I didn't, no.
Did you ever consider how the window surrounds at Grenfell Tower would behave if there was a fire in the compartment?
No.
Did it ever occur to you that there might be a need to be some form of fire barrier or fireproofing around the windows?
Internally, no, the directive was not to place one on the internals. So I guess you can assume that somewhere on the outside of the building, the strategy was already in place to deal with any fires on the outside.
I see. That was an assumption you made at the time, was it?
It wasn't one I needed to make at the time because my concern was the inside, not the outside.
Yeah. And did you think someone else was responsible for that fireproofing on the outside of the building?
We had no works on the outside of the building.
Yeah. Did you ever check yourself whether there were any cavity barriers around the windows during the time that you were involved in the internal window reveal work?
No, there was no requirement to do that.
Did you ever consider having a meeting with Harley to discuss the interface between your work and their work?
No, because that's starting to intimate that I'm taking on the design responsibility for this. That
Yeah.
wasn't the case at all. This was a series of works that were directed towards us with a series of benchmarks to hit, which was it needed to be in a pre-finished product. It needed to be as quick as we can to cause as less disruption to the residents.
Did you in fact know at the time that there were no cavity barriers immediately around the windows?
No.
Had you known that there weren't any such cavity barriers around the windows, do you think you would have done anything differently in terms of SDP's work?
If I'd known what the consequences and the outcome were, would I have done something differently? Everybody would have done something differently.
I understand that. But if you'd known at the time, suppose in that very first meeting at the show flat, Simon Lawrence had said to you while you were chatting, by the way, there aren't any cavity barriers around the windows. We've got cavity barriers, but they're further out away from the window. Do you think you would have raised any concerns about that at the time?
Possibly, yeah. I may have said to him, this is different to a new build situation, but as I keep saying, the difference between new build and refurb is there is a different criteria for this. And what you hope is that someone above my pay grade in a design element is actually looking at the strategy and saying, right, okay, there's no barriers around the windows, but because we're compartmented between floors and on the 60-minute walls, the risk is reduced.
I see, yeah. Mr. Cole says at paragraph 23 of his witness statement, I think I just read out what he says. This is at SDP 50220 at page 4. He says, as far as I'm aware, SDP were never instructed that the materials used in the completion of the works should have been of limited combustibility. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
How often had SDP used the Celotex TB4000 or the Kingspan Thermopitch product previously?
In that situation?
Yeah.
Never.
Never. Did you or anyone else on behalf of SDP ever seek any information about the fire performance of those insulation products?
No, we didn't look at the data sheets.
Did you or anyone else, to your knowledge, at SDP ever ask Ryden or any other party any questions about the suitability of those particular products in this application in terms of compliance with the building regulations?
Only in the fact that we created a sample using the same materials, which hopefully would have triggered any conversations in non-suitability.
Yeah. When you created that sample, how would those looking at the sample have known that it was that form of insulation you were using?
It's written on the face of it.
Yeah. So you'd have gone on the fact that it's on the branding, yes?
Yeah, I believe so. It depends where you cut the board, obviously.
Yeah.
But if there was a trigger for anybody to say, right, okay, this detail's not going to work, it
Yeah.
needs to achieve this, then it's somewhere in that criteria.
Yeah.
As I said, making a mistake once is a mistake. Making it throughout the building, that's a very different thing with so many people looking at it.
Yeah. Did you ever give any matters of compliance with building regulations or other industry guidance? Did you ever give that any consideration in terms of these internal works?
No, because I had assumed that this had already been done before we got there. Everybody else had already looked at it and said, this is the solution.
Yeah. Did you know at the time that the Celotex product was a European classification F product, Class F?
No.
Would that have meant anything to you if you had been made aware of that?
Based on what I know now, yes.
But back then,
It's not limited
if
to
one of your
plastability.
operatives had said, by the way, I've had a look on the product sheet and it's Class F fire performance, would that have meant anything to you?
That would have meant that it didn't perform particularly well against fire.
Right. So did you know in general terms about the European classification system from A1, A2 down to F?
I'm sure I'd have picked up on it at some point, but again, on that particular product, in that particular solution, they do sell it in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah, which by that alone means that it can be used in certain situations.
Yeah. But it didn't ever occur to you that because this was a tall building, there might need to be a need to just check whether that was appropriate?
No, because we made it obvious to everybody what we was doing and what we was using.
Yeah.
Ultimately, what I wanted and what should happen is there are several other people in this chain that can stop that process if they're not satisfied with it.
Did you know that the Kingspan product was a Class E Euroclass product?
No.
Were you aware that this was a combustible insulation material?
Not particularly, no.
Now, Mr. Lawrence said in his oral evidence to the inquiry that there was no formal approval process for the use of the two insulation products, the Celotex and the Kingspan. I think that accords with what you're saying, that there was no formal approval process, but that what you're saying is because it would have been seen in the mock-up, that was the process by which it was approved. Is that correct?
It would have been seen and it would have been talked about. So there would have been discussions. We do a mock-up to give everybody the opportunity to comment.
But you didn't ever see in a formal specification
No.
or a drawing, you didn't ever see it formally specified that this would be the Celotex or the Kingspan product? Would it be more usual at the time for a design and build contractor to insist on their own specification for a product like this? I.e. to have the specification imposed on you rather than...
Yeah, I guess it comes down to where the detail's being used and the importance of the detail.
Yeah. At the time, would you have preferred to have had more guidance on what to use in that location from Ryden?
In hindsight, yes, I would prefer to have every piece of guidance in front of us.
Yeah. Now, at paragraph 32.2 of your witness statement, you say that the Kingspan thermopitch boards were used interchangeably with the Celotex boards depending on their availability from your suppliers. Can you recall what quantities of the Kingspan product were used approximately in comparison with the Celotex?
No, I have no idea.
Okay. Did you ever have a discussion with Ryden where you discussed using the Kingspan in substitution for the Celotex? Did you ever have that specific discussion?
I can't remember if that happened, but I'm sure we'd have made someone aware of it at the time that we were changing products.
And if you'd have made someone aware, who would that have been, do you think?
It would have been one of the site team. It probably wasn't done formally,
Yeah.
saying we're swapping products.
Yeah. So at this point, I just want to take you through a few photographs so we can just orientate ourselves in the work that you did. If we look first, this is in section 9 of Dr. Lane's phase 1 report at BLAS 609 at page 20, and I want to look at figure 9.13. So this is, if we can blow this up, what we're looking at here, we're looking at a window jamb, and we're looking at the side of the window where the window infill panel would join the window itself. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yes. And we can see here that think there it's Celotex insulation. It's got red branding on it, and you can just see the end of the Celotex there. That insulation has been used to fill the gap between the original window infill panel and the new window infill panel. Do you see that there?
It's there to provide support to the plastic.
Yeah. And we can see that what's at the bottom in yellow is a deformed UPVC window surround, which has just peeled back and melted and fallen away, showing the board behind. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was work that your operatives did on site, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
Yeah. We can see another picture of this if we go to Mr. Hyatt's Phase 2 report. This is PHYR 5029 at page 20. And I want to look at figures 4.11 and 4.12. Yes, thank you. So I think we're looking at the other side of that window arrangement, back down towards where the window infill panels are. We can see the new white window infill panel, can't we, in that gap? Do you see that there? And we can see that here some of the insulation and its foil facer has fallen away. And then if we look on the right-hand picture, is it right that here we can see an example of Celotex and Kingspan being used in the same location? Is that correct?
Can, yes.
Because we've got the Thermopitch, the Kingspan Thermopitch on the bottom with the green, and the Celotex on the top with the red.
And you're looking at the rear of that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And again, that's work that your operatives would have done
Yes.
to put those boards in place.
Yep.
And were they under compression when they were going in at that location on the sides of the windows? Do you cut the insulation so it's too big and then squeeze it into that gap?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be precise because it will as long as it's got connection at some point. Originally, it could have been that we didn't fill the whole of that we just used blocks of it to support it.
Yeah.
But it was easier to put this in, and also it actually assisted with the thermal performance.
Yes. Yeah. And is it right that the insulation was stuck to the underside of the UPVC? Was there an adhesive used?
The UPVC was stuck to the insulation, yes.
Right. So on site, you'd put the glue onto the adhesive onto the UPVC, would you? And
I think
then
so, yes.
put it in?
Yep.
And it would just stick to the boards?
Yes.
Yeah, that's helpful. Let's look at the window head next. If we can go to BLAS 609 at page 6. And I want to look at figure 9.3. So if we can zoom in there. So I think what we're seeing here at the top of the page is the original timber window reveal linings, which were left in place. Is that correct?
Yep.
And then because the windows have been moved out, we've then got a gap at the head.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in that location, is that right, that the insulation has been compressed and pushed into that gap?
To support the rear of the plastic board.
Yeah. So the gap didn't go all the way across. You had some support from the original timber window reveals.
Correct.
Yeah, but you had gaps beyond that.
Yeah, which means, and where this came about was the fact that on the lower sill section, that if you didn't try and fill in the back with some sort of rigid material, you was going to be able to push them down, and that was the concern.
Yeah. And just to be absolutely clear, that was work at the head of the window that SD Plastering did, yes?
Yes, because it also shows the steel angle above, which appeared above and below the windows.
Yes.
Which was fitted by Harley.
Yes, and Dr. Lane has helpfully labelled that non-combustible steel angle at the window head that runs all the way along. Is that correct?
It certainly looks that way.
Yeah. And then let's look at the, staying with the jam, I think, if we can look at another Dr. Lane photograph. This is BLAS 609 at page 13, and I want to look at figure 9.9. Now here, am I right that what we're seeing is the interface between the side of the window and the columns?
Yes.
Yes. And we can see the black EDPM membrane that's been applied by Harley for waterproofing purposes, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then there's a gap that's been measured here. This one is approximately 120 millimetres, but we know that gap varied up the tower.
Yes.
Were you aware of that at the time?
It did vary, yeah. I think I even put that in my statement that it varied.
Yeah. And then at the bottom of the page, she's highlighted the gap between the inside face of the window frame and the edge of the concrete sill. We can see that there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because the original concrete tapered off, didn't it?
It did.
From away from the windows and below it. So
Yep.
we've got this gap in that location. And is that the gap where you applied the insulation board?
Yes, but it wouldn't have filled that gap at that angle. It would have filled the gap straight across. So
Exactly.
it would have, in fact, what it would have done is just close that gap off.
Yeah. So there'd still be a void underneath it, a triangle-shaped void,
Yep.
but you're capping off the top
Yes.
before putting the UPVC on top. Yeah. That gap there that she's highlighted in red, the unfilled gap between the edge of the column and the window support bracket, was anything ever done in that gap there?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah. Now, if we can look at, on the same page, figure 9.10, 9.10. Yes, so there I think we're looking up to the head of the window. We've looked down and now we're looking up. Is that right?
I believe that's showing you, yes, the reveal
Yeah.
on the right-hand side and the head.
Yeah, and this is helpful because we can see the old timber window frames. Is that right, on the right-hand side?
I think you can see a pattern there, yeah.
Yeah. And then at the sill, if we look finally at the sill position, if we can go to BLAS 609 at page 5 and look at figure 9.2. So if we could zoom in on that a little bit more. So here we can see the sill position. Starting at the very bottom, we can see the original timber battens, and then we can see the original concrete window sill. Is that correct? At the bottom?
Yes.
And beyond it, that's where we then get the void where the concrete slopes off before the new window. Is that right?
Yes.
And is it that bit that was marked in yellow that was the bit that was bowing when you looked at the
Correct.
sample?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. And again, we can see the black EDPM membrane down the side. And just to be clear, did your operatives place insulation board in that gap that's marked with yellow?
Yes. I believe it actually came across the top of that gap and then was wedged in up against what this doesn't show, if I remember rightly, there was an existing timber surround, which looks like it's been removed in this photo.
Yeah.
So I think it was actually between the rear of that existing timber frame and the existing window frame. That's where the compression happened.
I see. We can see a little channel at the bottom. Is that maybe where that timber has been removed?
I think there's probably a batten missing somewhere through here as well, and it
Yeah.
sat on top of that and was fixed and came out.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. Now, can we turn to something that was known as the NBS specification on the project? This is SEA 50169. This was prepared by Studio E architects on the Grenfell project. It's called the NBS specification. It formed part of the employer's requirements in Ryden's contract. Can you recall, I'll take you to a specific bit of it in a moment, but can you recall ever seeing any extracts from the NBS specification when you did your work?
It may have been more towards the dry lining though,
I see.
not in line with this. So we may have the extracted pages that form part of the dry lining package. It may have
Yes.
even been the whole document, but if it had been,
Yeah.
we would have only focused on the elements that were associated to dry lining.
If you had those elements that related to the dry lining package, did it ever occur to you to ask, can we see anything in the NBS specification that relates to the window surrounds?
No, I think we was one of the last people to cost this element
Yeah.
of works. There'd been many before us. You'd like to think that there'd been a series of processes that had gone through, And what we was being exposed to was the remaining option.
Yeah. So does that mean, in your view, that the window surrounds were an afterthought on this project?
I think reading back through the emails and then out, but remembering that the original ones were a birch surround, which appeared, and then a saving was taken and everything else, and that they were afterthought. I think they were a VE option that were designed into it.
I think you just said a VE option. Do you mean a value engineering option?
Correct. Yes.
Yes. So these window surrounds were the product of some value engineering because the birch was too expensive, yes?
That's quite well documented through some of the
Yes.
other.
Were you aware at the time that birch window surrounds had been specified by the
No.
architects?
No. That's only become apparent through reading the information that we now have.
Yeah, so nobody at Ryden ever said to you, by the way, originally we were going to have birch here, but we can't afford that.
If they did, I didn't note it.
Okay. Can we turn within this MBS specification to page 242? And this is the beginning of the P10 section, which is for sundry insulation and proofing work.
Yep.
And if we can look at page 243, one page on from that, and if we look at clause 235 at the very bottom of that page, can you see there it says compressible insulation in gaps, manufacturer Rockwool Limited, and it says the material is mineral wool to BSEN 13162, thickness to suit application available, and then installation joints, buttered, no gaps, cut and fit tightly between and around cladding supports, fasteners, used where necessary to retain insulation and or prevent slumping. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Did you ever see this part of the NBS specification?
Not to my knowledge.
Are you familiar with the Rockwool product that's mentioned here?
It mentions a brand. It doesn't mention a product.
Did you know that Rockwool was a mineral wool
It's a Rockwool.
at the time?
Rockwool, not mineral wool. It's a Rockwool-based product.
I see, yeah. Had you heard of mineral wool-based products at the time you were working on Grenfell?
And Rockwools, yes.
Yeah. Did Ryden or any other party ever suggest to you that SDP ought to consider using a mineral wool around the outside of the windows?
No, but secondary to that, a 25mm mineral wool, unfaced or faced, is not going to provide the support that you require to stop the seals from bowing.
Yeah.
Rockwool is a very compressible, flexible product.
Could you perhaps applied a plasterboard and then some mineral wool if necessary?
You could have done a multitude of things, but none of those were specified or
Yeah.
drawn, and which indicates that they didn't foresee that being the main issue of fire escaping or the compartment line.
Yeah. Did you know at the time that there was a difference in terms of fire performance between a mineral wool or rock wool type insulation and, say, a phenolic insulation or a PIR insulation board?
Again, depending on what brand, because obviously there were plenty of on the market at the time that performed similar, but Rockwool is it's based around wool. It's based around rock. It's manufactured from rock, so it's non-combustible.
Yeah. And when you say there were plenty on the market at the time that performed similar, are you saying there were plenty of insulation boards, foam boards, which performed similar to Rockwool at the time?
Probably not exactly the same as Rockwool, but have different gradings and different categories as the European F to A. So
Yeah.
there would have been other products out there that had a different performance standard.
Yeah.
But it depends on the thickness as well. They don't all necessarily start at the thinnest one.
Yeah.
They might have to get to a normal thickness.
Yeah. Did it ever occur to you that a compressible mineral wool insulation might be preferable to fill the gaps rather than a rigid insulation board?
It would have. It wouldn't have served the purpose that it was intended for, which was to support the seals.
I see. Did it ever occur to you that such a mineral wool insulation might be preferable in terms of the fire performance of the window surrounds?
No.
Did you ever consider how the UPVC surrounds and the combustible insulation would perform in a fire if there was such a fire in the compartment?
No.
And that never gave you cause for concern?
No, because it's the overall strategy that deals with fire. In the same vein, in a set of window reveals, there can be curtains, the sill can be full of books, there can be a multitude of other combustibles in that area that are not fireproof.
Yeah.
But it's true to say, isn't it, that the UPVC was particularly susceptible to
Plastic.
deforming and...
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so it wouldn't provide the same sort of fire protection as plasterboard or some other form of, one might say, more orthodox or at least
Definitely.
old-fashioned material.
Yeah, definitely not. It's not fit for that purpose. It was fit for the purpose that it was intended for in this situation, which was given us by the guidance, which was the product needs to be easy to install, it needs to be quick, it needs to be pre-finished. And again, these decisions, when I started reading through the documents, this was way in advance of we'd got involved in it, that those decisions had already been made.
Yeah. I understand that, Mr. Dixon. We're just trying to understand what you understood at the time and what you were told at the time. On the UPVC, we know that Ryden had used a plastic fascia and soffit board in the mock-up that you saw first up. Do you know whether that's what we know as the UPVC, do you know whether the UPVC that SDP then purchased and used for the windows was the same as that had been used in the mock-up?
I can't say if it was definitely the same product.
So was SDP ever instructed by Ryden to use a specific type of UPVC board, or was it that left to SDP to come up with whatever it thought appropriate?
It was to try and marry as close as possible to the aesthetics of the one that was already in place.
Did you ever discuss the selection of the UPVC window surrounds with Ryden? Did you ever have a discussion about that?
No.
Did you ever consider the appropriateness of the selection of UPVC surrounds when used in combination with a combustible insulation behind?
No.
Did you ever consider the fire safety implications of installing a UPVC window surround?
No.
Now, expanding foam is my next topic. Can you just help us, and if necessary we can go back to some of the photos. Is it right that expanding foam was used to fill the oddly shaped gap at the junction of the window and the concrete column?
Not by us.
Not by you?
No.
Did SDP ever use any form of expanding foam?
Yeah, I don't believe so, not around any of the window surrounds.
If we can look at an image from Dr. Lane's report, this is at BLAS 609 at page 13, and I want to look at figure 9.10. Yes, so there, we did look at this earlier. We see in the middle label with the red wiggly hatching around it that Dr. Lane has noticed that combustible expanding foam has filled the gap there between levels. Can you help us as to whether or not that was something that SDP did?
I don't believe that's anything to do with our works. There was no point to us putting that in. So I'm assuming at some point it was to fill the gap between the frame in the window or done from the outsides rather than the insides.
Right. So just to be clear, to your knowledge, there wasn't any form of expanding foam used by SDP installers?
Not to my knowledge.
Now, I just want to look now at your statement to the Met Police. If we can look, this is MET 3056695. This is your main statement that you gave to the police. And if you look at the bottom of page 1, we can see you say there, SDP is an experienced construction company providing, and then you list various works.
Yep.
And then you also say compartmentation, fireproofing and property development. Do you see that there?
I do.
And if we also look at the top of page 4 of this statement, you say compartmentation refers to subdividing areas and what that compartment needs to achieve. This can vary from sound to fire resistance and water resistance with regards, etc. With regards to the work carried out by SDP at Grenfell Tower, the compartmentation was determined and directed as per the architect's drawings provided by Ryden. And then in the last paragraph on that page, you say, penultimate paragraph, you say compartmentation follows the indicated lines of fire protection given by the architect and can involve either construction of walls or placing of fireproof materials to fill gaps within those indicated lines. Now, looking at all of that, can you just help us? In what way did your work on the Grenfell project around the windows include compartmentation and fireproofing? Was there any compartmentation and fireproofing?
No, there wasn't. It was
No.
none indicated as required. Normally what you do is, and this mainly refers to the lower 4 floors with the compartment walls, so all the walls in there will be given different ratings, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 120.
Yeah.
And that means that if you have to then, someone makes a penetration in your wall, you just need to compartment it back to that line
Yeah.
that's shown on the drawings.
Yeah,
There's no drawings that indicated to us, or we was guided to, that said you need to achieve 30 minutes round a window or 60 minutes or whatever it might be.
yeah. So when you're referring there to compartmentation and fireproofing, is it right that you're actually referring to other works that SDP did at Grenfell Tower?
Correct.
Yeah.
It had no bearing on the upper floor works.
Yeah. And you also said in those paragraphs that the work at Grenfell that SDP did was determined and directed as per the architect's drawings. But again, can we agree that you didn't have any architect's drawings directing you as to what to do on the window surrounds?
Agreed.
Now, if you were aware that compartmentation can include placing of fireproof materials to fill gaps, can you help us as to why at Grenfell Tower no consideration appears to have been given to the gaps around the windows and placing fireproof materials in those gaps?
I can only assume, again, that prior to our involvement in it, the strategy had been run and someone had taken the decision that it wasn't required in those areas.
Did you ever query with Ryden? I mean, you worked for them for a long time, you knew them well.
Yep.
Did you ever query and say to them, we need a proper specification for this and we need the architect to approve this? Did you ever say that to them?
No, because we came so late to the party, we've assumed that everybody else has already run every scenario, got it right. There's been a lot of people involved in getting it to this stage. I don't need to be guided anymore and being told it's an aesthetic finish. We've just got to close this off and make it look like it's supposed to again around the windows.
Yeah. But do you agree that you yourself didn't take any proactive steps to examine the fire performance of the windows surrounds and the extent to which those complied?
No, I didn't. I didn't. I wasn't asked to.
Now, moving on in the correspondence now, I want to ask you some questions about some correspondence on the 27th of May 2015 and some issues that were flagged by Ryden about the work to the window surrounds. If we can turn up RYD 30042485. So this is an email from Simon Lawrence to you of the 27th of May 2015. And the subject is Grenfell, flat 145 and 17th floor communal. Now, flat 145 was the pilot flat, wasn't it?
Correct.
Yeah. And we can see, he says, I understand you're visiting Grenfell tomorrow to take a look at the window trims, amongst other areas. And then he asks in the next paragraph, once you've had a chance to take a look, could you give me a call, please? He talks about the boxing in the next paragraph, which we're not concerned with. And then he says this in the 4th paragraph, I then took a look at the window trimming, which unfortunately wasn't the finished item that I was expecting. There are still some areas which need tidying up, i.e. joint strips need installing, a couple of side trims outstanding, and there's a large gap behind several reveal returns which are too large to mastic. Also, Andy has used a different UPVC product than the original. It had more of a bull nose. Whilst I preferred the square edge, I'm not that fussed. However, they now need to retrim the original window so it matches. And then I want to read the next paragraph as well. He says, my biggest concern is how they have fitted the window boards compared to the original attempt. It seems that because they have used a thicker board, they have decided not to install a plasterboard packer below. In my opinion, that was a big mistake. This means that now all of the windows have a void beneath them, which is only partly stuck with grip fill. As soon as you press them, they noticeably deflect, some really badly. In my opinion, this isn't acceptable and they all need reinstalling. Have a look and see what you think. So, I just want to ask you a few questions about that, and in particular about his biggest concern, where he talks about the window boards. Now, is it right that at this point what he'd seen was the use of a thicker board, a thicker insulation board with no plasterboard packer below?
No, a thicker. He's talking about a thicker plastic board. So what I believe what this refers to is we did one sample window in a flat of which there were more than one window. Yeah. So then what you had is there was one window still to finish. They asked Andy to finish that to get handover of the show flat. Andy went to get some available materials, which then was a different plastic capit board. So what he's referring to is I've got square edge on 3 windows, I've got bull nose on another one. Although it's thicker, I can still push the back down. So his concerns were not to do with the plasterboard, it was still concerns to do with it looks different to the other windows that have already been finished in there, and also the back has not been supported correctly.
I see. So when he says it seems that because they've used a thicker board, they've decided not to install a plasterboard packer below, the thicker board he's referring to is the UPVC, is it?
Right.
But is it right that there'd been a decision at this point not to install a plasterboard packer below?
I don't think we ever installed a plasterboard packer below. I think we went from staring at it for quite a while and then saying, well, okay, they managed to support it with Celotex in the original one. Let's go back and support this with Celotex again.
He's saying
what happened here seems to be that the alternative window board was deeper than the original one that had been fitted.
Correct.
Didn't leave enough room for the packing that was originally used, so no packing was used.
I think they thought by using a thicker board they can balance it and stick it to the front and it would self-support at the back.
Right,
but it doesn't. It wants to do that. So I think what we've got to recognise here is the show flat there was a deadline to get it finished. I think you can see in one of Simon's other emails how frustrated he gets with Daniel Osgood, or Osborne, or whatever his name is, saying, why isn't it done, why isn't it done? And it was all hands to deck, and I think what Andy had done is picked up some more plastic to do this last window, to try and get it finished, to show the residents and that, and inadvertently picked up a different material. But it was only in that one window location.
I see. So you're saying this was a thicker PVC with nothing underneath it, no plasterboard, no insulation.
In all honesty, I don't know if Andy packed it out with insulation, but the mere fact that Simon's saying that he could put pressure on the back and drop it down indicates to me that we'd not supported that as we had done every other window.
Yeah.
Because every other window, after they'd been completed, we didn't have any defects that said push the back down.
But do you agree, he seems to be saying in this email that not installing a plasterboard packer below he thinks was a big mistake?
I think he's incorrect. I don't think that's what he meant at all. We never installed a plasterboard packer at the back. There's no window. If you expose every window on the job, there's never been a plasterboard packer in there.
Well, we saw in your quote for the job that you had got mention of plasterboard and insulation, and you said you wanted to keep that flexible so that you had some choice.
We didn't need it.
But might that not have caused him to think that you were going to be using a plasterboard packer below the UPVC?
Okay, but then let's refer to it as exactly what it is as a packer. That means it can be 35mm wide by 100mm deep. There's no closing of the cavities, there's no nothing. It acts as a supportive strip. So you could have them at intervals of 500mm.
I see. So what you're saying is they wouldn't have stretched across the whole of the gap.
It's not a plasterboard closer, it would have been a packer.
Right.
There was talk of creating small plasterboard 100mm rips, sitting them in there under compression and then making sure the glue lines are on there. But what we was finding was, in between those 500mm, you could still get some compression.
Yeah.
So everybody went, we've got to get a continuation of that detail when we've supported it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, had you finished? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're going a bit fast for the transcriber.
Sorry, I can't help that. Try not to.
Yeah, please, if you would. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to be absolutely clear, I think what you're saying is any consideration that was being given to a plasterboard packer was a much narrower product, just a strip of it, which wouldn't have addressed the problem of bowing either side of it.
No.
Is that correct?
No, and I think what you got to remember...
Sorry, when you say no, does that mean...
Sorry.
Are you agreeing with me?
I am agreeing with you, yes, you're
Yeah.
quite right. So the reality is using the smaller plasterboard packers would have just supported areas at different increments rather than trying to create one detail running through.
Yes.
The other problem we all find...
Sorry. Just let's get that down. Yes, okay. Carry
The
on.
other issue with using plasterboard is it's considerably more difficult to scribe in to the gap, which would have been irregular. With the insulation, you can then cut it to the approximate side and compress that in.
I see. That's helpful. And where he says, this means now all of the windows have a void beneath them, which is only partly stuck with grip fill. Help us just, what's the grip fill?
Well, he calls it grip fill, but it's the adhesive between the board. It's between the board and the plastic. So we stuck the two together.
Between which board and the plastic?
Between the insulation board,
Yeah.
and the plastic, that's how we adhered the two
I see.
together.
So that would suggest that there was some insulation underneath what he'd inspected at this time.
I'm not sure. Can you repeat that bit?
Yeah, so I'm asking you about it's 3 lines down in that last paragraph. He said, this means that now all of the windows have a void beneath them, which is only partly stuck with grip fill. And I'm just asking you what the grip fill was, and I'm trying to work out what was stuck to the grip fill.
So I think what he's doing is he's saying you've only stuck the front section with a grip fill, which is not grip fill, it's the other product that we used, but you only stuck the front, which means there's a void at the back, which in turn means that we can push the back of the board down, which is the whole point of putting the bridging material in there.
Yeah. Okay. Was any consideration ever given to putting a full width of a plasterboard packer across that gap, thereby enhancing the fire performance of the window?
No.
Did you ever think about the fire performance of a plasterboard product in that area?
No.
And whether a fire-rated plasterboard product might have provided more fire resistance in the event of a fire?
It would have done, but it wasn't requested as that was the detail that needed to be done.
But I think what you're confirming, and we'll follow this through, is that in the end, it was only ever insulation that was installed in those gaps, and no plasterboard packer was ever installed. That's correct, yes?
Correct.
Now, Mr. Lawrence, we looked in the earlier parts of this email, he obviously thinks you're going to be visiting the tower the next day. Did you actually go in and inspect this window surround the next day?
I can't remember. I'm pretty good. If I say I'm going to go and look at it, I'm going to go and look at it. And I would suggest there's no following emails from this, which means we must have rectified it.
Right. Can you recall who might have been with you when you went back and looked at the window surrounds?
No.
Now, just looking at paragraph 27 of your witness statement, if we pull that up, SDP 50196 at page 6. You say, during the course of completing the works in the pilot unit, it became apparent that contrary to what I had specified within the original quotation, it would not be necessary to use both insulation board and plasterboard to bridge the gap, the insulation board alone being sufficient for this purpose and firm enough to provide the necessary support for the plastic soffit and fascia board. I had made an allowance within the original quotation for the potential use of plasterboard in the works as a precaution in case the insulation board alone did not provide sufficient support for the plastic soffit and fascia board. So we can see that, and you just explained to us, I think,
Yes.
how that came about. And did that become apparent at the time you were doing another pilot of the window, at the time you were working on window 145?
No, what I did was I gave myself the flexibility of coming across something else in the building that we hadn't envisaged. Because if that had been the case, Rydens would have said, can you deal with that problem within your price? So I'd taken and said, right, okay, you might have to do this there, you might have to do that there. But in the most, what we've done in the show flat should fit most areas.
Right. Now, if we can look at another email, an email you send in response to that long one from Mr. Lawrence, if we go to RYD 42488, sorry, RYD 42488. So this is your reply to Simon Lawrence. It's on the same day, 27th of May, 2015. You reply in the evening. And we can say, you say, evening, Simon, starting at the top, see responses below. I'm on site tomorrow and will assess all areas, but in relation to the points raised. And then you say this, you say, the fitting of the window boards was changed by me to try and streamline the process based on a thicker board. This does not work, so we will change back to the original method of plasterboard backer first, giving a more even surround. Do you see that there?
Yep.
Now, would you agree that when Mr. Lawrence read this, he would therefore have assumed that you were going back to an original method of having plasterboard backer first?
Yeah, that's incorrect. We definitely didn't use a plasterboard packer.
So why were you telling Mr. Lawrence at this point that you would revert back to that method of installation?
It may have been because it was 7:45 in the evening.
So were you saying this to try and get Mr. Lawrence off your back?
No, definitely not. I don't try and get anybody off my back. If I've got a duty to do something, I do it. This is just a mistake. The plasterboard backer wasn't in there. It was actually the Celotex backer.
I see. So are you saying this was just a mistake you made in this email?
Yes.
That what you meant to say is we'll go back to the original method of Celotex insulation first, giving a more even surround?
Yeah, even with the ball nose, the thicker board that Andy picked up, when we was questioned over it, I think it was never ever going to work because it wasn't supported enough at the back. So we knew we was going to end up changing back.
Did you ever realise that you'd made that error in this email when you were working on the project?
No, I was only exposed or reminded of this a little while ago.
Yeah. So you never went back to Mr. Lawrence and said to him, by the way, when I said I was going to change back to the method of installing plasterboard backer, I didn't mean a plasterboard backer, I meant something else?
Correct, I didn't go back to him and rectify that.
And if we can turn to SD Plastering's revised quotation that comes in just 2 days after this, on the 29th of May 2015, if we can turn that up, we saw it before, SDP 50137. Here we see in the email you're sending Adam Marriott. Morning, Adam. Please find attached our revised window sheet, which now includes the boxing in. And we know that you added the boxing in to the front of the flats. And if we look at page 2 of this document, we can see that revised quotation. And if we look in the top left-hand side, do you agree that it still says remove existing frame, place plasterboard backer to gain margin and close cavity?
Correct, and I think in my other statement as well that I issued, there was a note in there saying that that comment should have been removed for clarity.
Yeah. So what you ought to have done is, so you say you made a mistake in your 27th of May email referring to plasterboard backer, and then that wasn't taken out of this revised quotation when you sent it.
But that to one side, as we've established, the packer, which is only going to be 100 mil wide or anything, would have still benefited no more apart from it had no combustibility, but the cavity would have still been open.
Yeah. But do you agree that based on what we've just looked at, the email and this revised document, Mr. Lawrence and Ryden would have assumed that you had used plasterboard packer in those locations?
That would insinuate that they didn't go and check anything after that point.
I see.
They checked every single unit after that point. There was no plasterboard anywhere.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, that might be an appropriate moment for a break.
Yes.
I'm doing well. I haven't got too much left to go, but I think if we break now, it's a
It's
good
more
moment.
sensible time.
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Well, Mr. Dixon, we're going to have a short break now.
Okay.
We'll come back at 25 to 4, please, and resume then, if that's all right.
Excellent.
And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room.
No problem. Excellent.
Thank you.
you.
Go to the usher, please. Thank you. 25 to 4, please. Thank you. Yes, would you ask Mr. Dixon to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Dixon, ready to keep going?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very
Yes,
much,
thank
Mrs.
you.
Grange.
Yes. A couple of times in your evidence this afternoon, you mentioned that there was an email involving Ryden where the Celotex product had been mentioned early on. Can I just take you to a document? This is RYD 3037749. Yeah, and I think it's in the middle of that page, the Adam Marriott email. So this is Adam Marriott to Simon Lawrence, copying in others at Ryden. So you weren't copied into this email.
No.
And he says, morning, Simon. And then he says, so it's 1st of April 2015. So it's early on in the story of, or your story of the window surrounds. And he said, Everglades did not use any 4x2 timber yesterday. To overcome the aluminium track, they laid Celotex and then applied the UPVC on top. Regards, Adam. Now, is that the email you were referring to?
Yes.
Earlier in your evidence, where you say it's clear that Ryden themselves, when the mock-up was done, before you looked at that first mock-up, had been using Celotex?
There'd obviously been some sort of thought already given to that.
Yeah. Now, is it your evidence? You're not copied into any of these emails. When did you first see these email chains?
Only in the last 2 weeks when I've been preparing myself for this.
I see. So you weren't aware at the time of these emails?
No.
But where...
I'm sorry, Ms. Grange, can I just interrupt? This means absolutely nothing to me at the moment. Are you able to explain what people are talking about here? And what's the 4x2 timber doing, for example?
Nothing as far as I can tell. Perhaps what they were thinking of doing is placing the 4x2 timber in between the cavity of the window on the outside and then the concrete on the inside. But I can't see how that would have worked because you'd have had to literally scribed every piece in to do it. And that's what I'm saying. There's some comments between Simon's emails and other emails that I don't really think that they grasped what was going to actually be happening there.
Then they say to overcome the aluminium track.
Yes, I was about to ask that.
Sorry.
So in some instances, the track stayed in. So the aluminium track is the outer frame of the window.
Of the old window.
Of the old window.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to use something like this would have lifted it up enough for you to sail over the top of the track, which I think in a lot of cases the track remained in place where we was. The Celotex raised it up at the back, and then by the time you'd stuck the board across the top onto the front existing board, you could go across the top of the track.
Thank you very much. I think I nearly understand.
Yeah, and I think we do see that this is entitled Grenfell Tower's Window Surrounds. So the combination of them talking about the Celotex and the UPVC on top, when you read these recently, you thought that they were referring to the window surrounds we're dealing with here now.
Yeah, I believe that's the case.
Yeah. When you inspected that show flat for the first time, flat 145, was it clear that it was Celotex insulation that was underneath the UPVC?
No, I'm not sure. I can't really remember. And I think even in one of my earlier statements, I think one of them that we inspected, there was nothing underneath.
Yeah.
So, but there must have been a section somewhere that we've stolen the idea, for want of a better word, to say, well, that seems to work, and perhaps what we'll do is we'll support the windows using this method.
So is it your evidence that you think that's where you got the idea of using the Celotex product, because it had been used in that mock-up?
I can't say for definite, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking that we've kind of replicated something that somebody else has already done.
Yeah. Now, just a couple of questions on the birch window surrounds. Had birch window surrounds been used, would that have obviated the need for any packing or wedging around the outside?
I have no idea of how they intended, whether they were going to take the old ones out, completely replace them, or how they were going to fix them, whether they're going to face fix them, the thickness of it. It didn't, as I say, I've only picked up on the fact that these birch surrounds were the original intention via the information I've been given lately.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so there was no mention of this before. This was, as far as I was concerned, the plastic was the way forward.
Yeah. Now, just picking back up where we were before we broke off, we were discussing the plasterboard backers. And we saw in your email and then in your revised quotation that there was reference to plasterboard backers. But I think what you were then saying was, well, we didn't use them and it would have been obvious to Ryden on site that we hadn't used them. Is that right?
Yes.
And your evidence is if they'd had a problem with that, they could have told you on site that that was unacceptable.
As I keep referring back to, I think you can make one mistake. You don't make 100 and something mistakes in every single flat. Someone at some point is going to pick up on that process and say, well, hang on, builder control have looked at them. We've looked at them. The architect, I assume, at some point has looked at them. And everybody has come back and saying that this is fine, this is what we're doing.
But just to be clear, did SDP or you yourself ever get express approval from Ryden not to use plasterboard packers? Did anyone say to you after those emails and the quotation, we are okay with you not using plasterboard packers?
No, it's a natural progression.
I see. And was a plasterboard packer ever used in any of the windows?
Not to my knowledge. I don't believe they were used anywhere. I think the method that was finally installed was the most appropriate method.
Now, if we can go back to the email that you said in response, you sent on the 27th of May 2015 in response to Mr. Lawrence's email. This is RYD 30424888. You say towards the end of your message, 5 lines up from the bottom, you say this, you say, we are still struggling to find our feet on the window details, and I'm still anxious that taking on these works is going to give me additional headaches I could have done without, and add in the timescales, I'm not looking forward to it. We are committed now, so I need to find ways of making it easier and quicker before I add another team in, before we have it under control. Do you see that there?
I do.
Now, can you just explain to us why, at the end of May 2015, SDP was still struggling to find its feet on the window surrounds?
It's making the process quicker. What it refers to is the sequence of events. So you've got to remember, when we go into a unit, these are occupied, which means that half of your job is going to be making sure that you can access each window. So it was about trying to streamline the process, that when we went in, we could get on with it. We could cut it perhaps quicker in a different way. We changed the method of cutting it, but they were all around the methodology of doing it rather than changing the specification.
I see. So it's the configuration of how you did it rather than what materials you were using.
It's the sequence that we did it in.
Did SD Plastering not have sufficient personnel to carry out the work at this time?
Not at the speed that they wanted to go at. And one of my concerns was not just, let's put 2 teams in there and go for it, was access. In a residential block, access changes by the minute, which means that you can plan for the best scenario of doing 2 streams of 2 flats, 1 a day, 7 units a week, I think the aim was. And you get 2 or 3 residents drop out now, and you've got a lot of people standing still. So it was more a case of me trying to convince them, look, you want to do this logically and in a way that's controllably, let's use 1 team. Yeah, they do this in the morning, that on the other one. And actually there was kind of 2 parts to it. One part was going in the first day, the windows being taken out, putting the Celotex round, taping it all up, making sure it's ready for the next day, where the next team comes in and then actually cuts every piece and puts it around there. And one of the things that we did to speed that process was team 1 would measure all the plastic so they had a cutting list for the next morning. Right. So that was that kind of thought process of let's manage with 1 team, let's be controlled in the manner that we do it, but let's at least make sure that we're sequenced correctly.
So those were the constraints and pressures on you that meant you were not looking forward to carrying out the work, and it would give you additional headaches, is that right?
Yeah, there's no getting away from it. Working in residents' houses is very disruptive for them. It's not always welcomed, and when you're trying to get to every window, which has got all of their personal belongings stacked up against it, it's not pleasant for a lot of people. So I very rarely look forward to that.
Can we look at another email now? This is RYD 30424887. this is an email from Simon Lawrence to Daniel Osgood and Simon O'Connor, dated 27th of May, about the show flat. Now, this wasn't sent to you, you're not copied in here. And he says, gents, I've sent an email tonight to Mark explaining my thoughts and asking him to call me when he's on site tomorrow. I thought it best not to copy everyone in, so hopefully he doesn't get defensive about the work. And then he says, I've also made Steve Blake aware so he isn't shocked when he visits tomorrow. And then overall, I'm extremely upset that we've got to today, and in my opinion, are nowhere near having the flat in a show condition. Shouldn't take me to visit and notice the issue straight away. Apart from being unfinished in areas, the bouncy window board is a disaster. I still can't understand how it hasn't been noticed before. And then he carries on. And then at the end of this email, he says, please ensure this happens. It's our last chance. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So Mr. Lawrence was clearly concerned about the works. Did you get that impression at the time from Ryden?
Well, this links into the other two emails that we looked at previously. So this is the show flat. So it's not the whole job, it's the show flat. There's a lot of pressure on the show flat because you want to get it looking right, because they were ready to show the residents round. I think they'd already delayed it once. I think Simon's frustrations are frankly based around the fact that they weren't going to have this ready for the opening day for the client to inspect and everybody else. So it could have involved painting, masticing and everything. I think the bouncy seal then leads back to one of the other emails where we changed the window board on that one window. That was in the show flat.
Okay. And is that why Mr. Lawrence considered it the last chance to get the works right? Because it's all about the show flat and the pressure on that flat?
I think probably Simon meant it's your last chance. To his managers saying you need to get this right. I think that's probably what he was intimating. Yeah.
Now, I just want to ask you some more questions about the cost to SDP of doing the works and the timescale within which it had to do it. If we can turn to RYD 30040686. We've looked at this before. This is where you sent to Adam Marriott your first quotation. And in the third line, where you say this is nowhere near your allowance, and believe that even our costs might be tight, the team I was hoping to use wants considerably more money than I've allowed due to the risk element. Can you just help us as to what you meant there by the risk element?
Let me just make sure I get this in the right context. So, well, the risk element is I can't foresee how much furniture I've got to move when I go into a unit, how well prepared the unit is, what I'm going to face when I go in there. We hadn't gone round and surveyed every unit at that time. So I think one of the things we implemented in that strategic, trying to make it better as well, is I sent a document to him saying, follow this sequence, it will make our lives a lot easier. And one of those was to visit the unit, both Ryden's, the RLO, and one of my team, 1 or 2 days before to make the resident aware of the disruption that was going to happen. But the risk was if I get there and I can't get in. The risk is if I get there and this window's completely different to all the others, or I've got to spend the first 2 hours of every day moving every piece of furniture in and then placing it back at the end of the day so the resident doesn't feel like they've had their lives totally disrupted.
I see, yeah. And at the end of that paragraph, you say, so I've built 2 lines up, you say I've built a team using mostly employees to tackle this. How did that team differ from the original team you might have been hoping to use?
The original team was a team of carpenters. So this is more carpentry work than it is anything else. It's the ability to measure, cut and mastic and finish. The carpentry team that I wanted to get there, whether it be the height of the building or location, had just come up with a completely different, because we tried to keep people on price work as much as we can. Yeah. They just weren't interested. So that meant I had to readjust myself. So I built Andy, and then I brought some other labour in that we use all the time, and I built a team that I thought was most suited for doing those works.
Yeah. Is it right that SDP engaged various subcontractors as part of the installation team?
Yes.
And who at SDP had responsibility for recruiting those subcontractors?
That would have been conversations between me and Andy.
Yeah. And what steps did SDP take to satisfy themselves that the individuals engaged to carry out the work had suitable qualifications and experience?
Well, as before, the qualifications they needed were to be able to cut the boards, fit the insulation, so there is no qualification as such, it's experience. So the individuals we used were people that were known to us.
Yeah. Did you know at the time that Ryden thought that Harley and SD Carpentry were going to be too expensive for this job?
Not particularly. It might have been mentioned somewhere, but I don't really take much notice of that.
What steps did you take to ensure that the quality of the works completed by SDP was not compromised due to cost pressures?
There was only one way to do this, the way that we'd done the show flat,
Right.
which was to use the Celotex, use the plastic. I couldn't come away from that because there was a set method. There was only 2/3 components in it. There's no way to cost save it. So if we was going to make it work financially, it was about our efficiency to install it and the methods we used.
If we can now turn to RYD 3042886. This is an email from you to James Clifton of Ryden. It's the one at the bottom of the page there. So this is the 2nd of June 2015, you to James Clifton, and copying in others at Ryden and Andy Cole at SDP. And you say, "Dear all, I was on site today and counted the number of windows per floor, which is 36, not 34, as stated by Adam at the time of tender. We will change the sheet and send revised sums in the near future." Do you see that there?
Yep.
Then if we look at Mr. Maynard's response to this, at the top of the page, Zach Maynard responds, and he says, "Mark, the labour time in each flat needs to stay the same, so this element of the cost can't change. Appreciate that your materials cost might be under pressure, but our budget costs remain the same, ! Cheers, Zach." Do you see that there?
I do.
And then I just want to look at your response before asking you some questions. This is at RYD 3042888. So what we can see from this is the following day, on the 3rd of June 2015, you respond to Zach Maynard and James Clifton, and you say, "Zach, as it stands today, these works are going to be difficult, and this is not an element that we wanted to do, and still don't, so are carrying it out because no one else wanted to. What I can't do is lose money on it. I've already changed from my original team as the prices did not work for them, and I'm wrestling with keeping the team in place that I have, and had to increase their prices to keep them interested in wanting to stay. Perhaps we can ask the carpentry team that's on site to also cost the works. These works have started much later than you planned meeting. I'm being asked to increase the programme to 2 teams at some point, which again gives me a lot of pressure I don't need at this point. I'm happy for the other team to pick up half the units, leaving me only 1 window short on my price. Please let me know how you wish to proceed." So is it right from this that as of June 2015, you're still very reluctant to be doing this work?
I'm very reluctant to do this work at a loss, and I think the price reflected the fact that we did increase the cost accordingly, and actually we did run it with pretty much 1 team as well, because I think in the end they saw a sense that it was going to be very difficult to get the access levels that they needed. So I think although there's a lot of to-ing and fro-ing, which is a surveyor's job, the outcome was that it was priced as it was supposed to be priced, and it was done in the sequence it was supposed to be done in.
Yeah. And have you already explained to us the reasons why you thought the installation works would be difficult? That's the word you use in that first line. Is that for the reasons you've just explained to us?
It's occupied refurb. It has its challenges.
And is it right that it was your view that SDP risked losing money in completing these works?
Yeah, I think as much as Zach is playing his game, I'm probably playing my game a little bit as well. I don't want to dumb down everything and say, yeah, Zach, that's fine, I'll take this. This was also about both of us getting to the right level of deal.
What steps did you take to ensure that SDP did not lose money on the work?
We made sure that we ran it in an efficient manner.
Yeah.
By using the 1 team, by making sure that we measured on day day one, using all those techniques, I made sure that my team was actually running it as efficiently as they can.
Did this ever impact on the materials that SDP specified for this job?
No, that wasn't an area that we was ever going to look to gain on.
And did the cost pressure you were under ever have any impact, in your view, on the quality of the installation?
No.
If we can turn now to RYD 3044331, and I want to pick up on page 3 of the chain. And I want to look, this is an email from Daniel Osgood of Ryden to you on the 22nd of June 2015 at 12:09. And he says, "Hi Mark, we need more manpower on the trimming of the windows. Andy needs someone to refit the curtains. We have tenants waiting and complaints will start." Do you see that there?
Yep.
And if we scroll up to page 2, we can see you reply on the same day. And in the first lines you say, "Dan, we will not be able to place more labour at this point on the window trims, but have a new team starting on Wednesday and several players will be coming out to go to another job. I stated last week that if we go to 2 teams, I believe this will give us issues when appointments fail, etc. Can we please run with the new team for 2 weeks and then reassess if more labour is required?" Now, is that what ended up happening, that you just stuck with the new team rather than having 2 teams?
I just increased the size of the team and gave them different disciplines on the same line rather than trying to go. It's a lot more difficult to manage, especially from a QA point of view, where Andy has then got to go to 2 different flats. He just followed the sequence and
Yeah.
And I think after this, there are very few, if any, emails that indicate that we wasn't achieving what we set out to do.
Yeah. Now, we saw previously in the email from you to Mr. Osgood of the 29th of May that you talked about making recommendations to streamline the process if we've got a chance of hitting targets. Again, have you already discussed those with us today? It's things like making sure the measurements are taken on day 1,
Correct.
so that the day 2 people go in efficiently and install the UPVC on day 2. Is that what you're talking about there?
Yeah, I believe the process was always going to be a lot easier if we had one controlled team.
Yeah. If we could look at RYD 3042888. This is the email. Actually, we've looked at this before, dated the 3rd of June. And if we look in the 6th line down, you say, picking up at the sentence, "These works have started much later than you planned," meaning I'm being asked to increase the programme to 2 teams. So can you help us? Is it right that work to the window surrounds was behind schedule?
I think they were. I think they were due to start several weeks earlier.
And did the work therefore remain behind schedule throughout the time you were installing those windows?
No, I think somewhere along the line we must have picked up the pace a little bit, or we was finding the process that we'd actually set out to do was working even more efficiently, because I wasn't getting a lot of negative feedback. I mean, there were a lot of units there, I think probably 5 or 6 a week, and as I say, I think if you work your way through the emails, there's nothing at the end that says you failed miserably in hitting the target dates.
Okay. Now, just having looked at those emails in the last 5-10 minutes, is it fair to say that SDP was under time pressure to get the work done?
Everybody's under time pressure all the time, but I resisted that and actually did what I thought was right to do.
I see. Did those time pressures ever contribute to SDP needing to put together a team of installers, which you felt was not ideal for the project?
They were ideal for the project.
And in your mind, did those time pressures ever lead to a compromise in the quality of the work undertaken?
No.
Now, supervision of the works. Is it right that the window surround works were supervised by Mr. Andy Cole of SDP on
Yes.
site? And was Mr. Cole himself ever supervised in terms of what he was doing on site?
Yeah, I was acting as the kind of go-between, so I would have, on many occasions I went there, I would have caught up Andy, checked progress, checked what we was doing, walked a couple of units. So it would have been a combination of me fulfilling the contracts manager's role, although being a director, and Andy doing the actual day-to-day install.
Yeah. If we can look at paragraph 38 of your inquiry witness statement, that's SDP 50196 at page 9. You talk about this phase of the works, and that's the window install, I think, being completed by what you referred to as SDPL's lead team, and you say who that consisted of.
Yeah.
And you've got, at 38.3, an individual called Carl Gellard, who's described as work experience. Can you just help us with that? Can you help us why you had a work experience?
He actually came from the training course that was held on Grenfell. So he was identified someone who actually wanted to work, he wanted to be part of the team, and he was looking for more work experience.
I see. Was he actually carrying out any of the fitting to the interior window reveals?
No, he would have been the lead team, just purely helped do the stripping out, putting the Celotex in place. So he may have cut some of the Celotex, and it would have been mainly Peter and Andrew that had actually gone round and installed it.
I see. Now, inspections, if we can then look within your witness statement on page 10 at paragraphs 44 to 45, you say there that there were a number of individuals from Ryden that would inspect and sign off the works, and you list what you call the sign-off team, Mr. Martin, Chris Holt, Daniel Osgood. And then you say it had originally been envisaged that one of the sign-off team would carry out their inspections on the day on which the works in the relevant units had been completed. However, it transpired that the sign-off team was not doing so, and myself and Andrew Cole had to chase the sign-off team on a number of occasions to undertake their inspections. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, just in terms of what the sign-off team were inspecting, were they inspecting once the finishers were in and the UPVC was in? Were they inspecting the final install of the windows?
The final install. So we're talking more about the acceptance as a finished product.
Yeah.
Yeah. The team of players you see there would have been in and out of the units all day long. So they would have been in at different stages. So, and because we split the two stages up, i.e. putting the Celotex in on day one, the capping board to day two, that means that there was this 24-hour period for people to actually look and see what's going on and see behind the plastic. So it became more apparent to everybody.
So are you saying that this same team, Gary Martin, Chris Holt and Daniel Osgood, would have had opportunities and did take those opportunities to look at the install before the UPVC went on?
I would certainly assume so, yes.
You assume so, or you actually know that they did on the project?
I wasn't there every day, but
Yeah.
I know Andy, through talking to Andy, they were certainly in and out of the units on countless times during the day.
Yeah. Now, given what you've said there at paragraph 45 of your statement about it being envisaged that they'd carry out their inspections on the day on which the work was completed, but they didn't do that and you had to chase, in your experience, was it unusual for SDP to have to chase its main contractor to carry out their inspections of the work?
It's more of a case of self-preservation, if I'm being honest. So the longer we leave the finished product unchecked, the more likely that accidental damage could happen to it. And then they go and check a week later after it was finished and they say, well, there's scratches all over it. That's down to you. So it trying to get them to sign off almost immediately after we finish means that it gives them a chance to say, you've not done this bit very well, or the resident has also inspected with us, we need to look at this again.
Yeah.
So it was just about trying to keep on top of it, really. The longer you leave it, the more chances that it can be knocked or knocked heavily or scratched or whatever, and then it's trying to recall who did that scratch.
Yeah. To your knowledge, was Ryden always behind schedule in terms of their carrying out of inspections of SDP's work?
No, I think once we'd kind of done this and put the firework in place, they were a lot more kind of proactive in making sure that happened.
Mr. Gary Martin has said in his oral evidence to the inquiry that he was responsible for inspecting the work to the window surrounds after Mr. Osgood's departure in July 2015, and that he would speak to you every time he was on site and that he worked very closely with your team. Do you agree with that?
I would suggest that Gary had a lot of contact with Andy on site.
With Andy Cole on site?
With Andy Cole on site.
Yeah. Did you understand that Mr. Martin was responsible for inspecting the work on behalf of Ryden?
It changed on several occasions, but we certainly knew someone was overseeing it at any one point.
If we can then turn to RYD 30/42593. This is a Grenfell internal work sequence sheet sent, we think, by SDP to Ryden on the 29th of May 2015. We've got the date at the top left-hand corner.
Yep.
And we think this followed on from the discussions about the work in the pilot flat with Mr. Lawrence at the end of May. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, and at stage 5 of the work there, so on the left-hand column, we can see stage 5 sign-off. And then if we read on the right, it says, this will take place with Danny on the end of the second day, where an SDP QA sheet will be signed by SDP and Ryden saying all work's completed. If minor snags cannot be undertaken in 2-day period, refer to comments below. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, did the work actually follow, was that procedure actually followed on site?
In the most, as I say from the email previously, is that they fell behind slightly doing some of those final inspections and sign-offs, but Andy would produce his QA sheets, hand them to them and say, is there any further comments and are there any snags? And I think during the whole process, we were probably emailed perhaps 2 or 3 times to say, can you go back and rectify this bit here, or can you do that?
Yeah. Now, it's right, isn't it, that Ryden did raise a number of concerns about SDP's workmanship on site?
I'm aware of a couple.
If we can look at an example, if we look at RYD 55835, and I want to look at the bottom of page 1 and on to page 2. Right at the bottom of that page, on the 28th of October 2015, at 16:33, we can see Chris Holt has written to Andy. And then if we go over the page and see what he says at the next, he says, as per our conversation earlier today, I've checked the window trims in flat 53 fitted today, and there are several issues that need addressing. Top trim in middle bedroom needs redoing. In the living room, bottom trims along the windows are not straight, and then excess mastics left on the trims in the living room. And then at the end of that email, he says, this is not a good workmanship, and I have been told by the tenant that the operatives have tried to rush through the job, and therefore we have this result. Could you organise for this to be rectified next week? Please bear in mind that we need to make an appointment with the tenant as he's not always in the property. And we can see from the top of this chain on page 1 that you were CC'd into this email chain.
I thought I responded, didn't I?
You may have done. I don't think that's in this particular chain, but we can see at the very top that you do get looped into this chain.
Mm-hmm. I thought I responded.
Right, okay.
But just, and again, Chris Holt...
Sorry, just for a moment. Did receipt of that email give you any cause for concern about Mr. Cole's ability to manage the works?
No, this unit was completely different to any other unit we'd been in. They created some detailing in around the windows that wasn't apparent anywhere else. So they had to think on their feet. They'd done a pre-survey, they got in there, it still wasn't quite working around. And Chris had picked up on this because the residents had obviously done some work themselves. It wasn't interfacing very well with their works. So he asked to rectify it and change it, which we did.
I see.
But I think after this...
So you don't think that what happened here when Mr. Holt is saying that SDP was rushing through the work to meet deadlines, you wouldn't accept that that was representative of the way in which the work was carried out on site?
Are there any further emails from Chris Holt to us?
I'm just asking you whether you understood that SDP had been rushing through the work to meet Ryden's deadlines in many of these flats.
No, it took exactly the same time scale that we planned for it to take. It didn't take any less or any more.
Now, you've referred at paragraph 47 of your witness statement to the fact there was a clerk of works, John White, was appointed by the employer to carry out inspections of the refurbishment work generally, including the works. And Mr. Cole has said at paragraph 24 of his witness statement that these inspections were carried out regularly. Can you help us as to how frequently Mr. John White inspected the works carried out by SDP to the window surrounds?
No, I can't. I believe the clerk of works was on site a couple of times a week. So if they did a walk round with him, I assume as part of that walk round, communals, externals, internals. So perhaps twice a week, but it's very difficult to say for certain. But obviously Andy refers to the fact that he did see him on a regular basis.
Do you know whether Mr. White saw the way in which the gaps between the new windows and the old timber window surrounds were being filled?
Again, because it was a 2-day process, you've got the progressive. I would assume that he's seen both of those, and I believe he must have been shown the show flat as well.
I see. Did Mr. White ever provide feedback to SDP on the work being carried out to the window surrounds?
Not to my knowledge.
If we can now turn to RYD 3044167, and I want to look at the bottom of page 1 and over to page 2. So we start at the bottom of page 1. There's an email from Simon O'Connor, 18th of June at 15:18, right at the bottom there, to Mr. Osgood. If we can go over the next page, we can see at the top of that page that you're CC'd into this email, Mark Dixon and Andy Cole. And the subject is Windows sign-offs. And he says, "Afternoon, Danny. Following a conversation with Andy Cole, SDP, this afternoon, he is concerned that we are ploughing ahead with internal window trimming and currently none have been signed off by COW. Is this correct? Please can you update me on this urgently, as we should be getting these signed off on a weekly basis." Now, do you remember seeing that email at the time?
I was copied into it, so I must have seen it at some point.
If we then look at Mr. Cole's response in the second email in the chain from the top on page 1. So if we look, yes, in the middle of that page, on the 18th of June 2015, Mr. Cole responds, and he says, "Hi all again. Friday count will be 17, but I have signed off 15 units and 2 are sitting on the desk and I will check them Monday. But please be aware, by Wednesday 24th of June, there'll be another 4 units to be signed off. It would be better if they were done each week, so not to have a backlog of units. Thanks, Andy Cole." So is it right that at this point the clerk of works was not inspecting the work on a regular basis, so that there was a backlog that had built up?
I think he was inspecting them. I just don't think they were doing the final sign-off paperwork.
I see.
So it's more of a case that he was still doing his duties, looking in the flats, checking things. I think possibly what has not happened is the final document, if you like, which goes to Rydens that we can refer back to and said it was signed off on this date.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Did you ever take any steps to ensure that the clerk of works inspections were more regular for the works you were carrying out? Did you ever initiate?
I think probably this is instigated by me.
Right.
Andy's emails.
Yeah.
I would have asked Andy how many are signed off. He would have said we're still waiting for some sign-offs. I would have said, can you send an email? Let's prompt everybody to get back to the process.
Would you agree that this email chain might suggest that the clerk of works was inspecting only the finished and final window surrounds rather than inspecting the installation process as it progressed?
Possibly, because the sign-off for me was the final sign-off. The progressive inspections didn't necessarily need a sign-off, but we needed to make sure that as many bodies as possible were looking at them as we went through. The clerk of works wasn't there every day, so he would have taken a percentage view on everything.
What does that mean? He took a percentage view on everything?
He can't see every single one at every single stage. He might be able to be there on the day after they've installed. So let's say we finished it on a Thursday, he might come in on a Monday and go round 5 units and inspect the final bit, but the day before he might only be able to inspect the install that's taking place on that day because it's only exposed for 24 hours, the subframe.
I see. Can we now look at RYD 30082733? This is a site inspection report, which is authored by Mr. John White, of John Rowan and Partners, and it's dated the 16th of June 2015. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And if we can go within this report at page 3 and look at the second paragraph down in the right-hand column. Can we just blow that up at the... No, it's the photograph, sorry. If we blow up the second row of photographs, if we could blow those up. Yes, we can see on the right-hand side, in his report, he said, flat 145, internal window trimming has been finished and KCTMO has agreed the finish. As from today, 9 flats have been finished, including old frames out, new glass and trims fitted. Do you see that there?
I do.
Now, do you know what he means by KCTMO has agreed the finish? What would that mean?
It's not the Kensington Chelsea TMO?
Yes, but, I mean, does that mean anything to you as to whether anyone from the TMO was agreeing the finishes of the window surrounds?
Oh, yeah, but I don't know who that refers to specifically, but that indicates to me that he's shown more individuals, and that's the show flat as well, 145.
Were you aware of any TMO employees, individuals inspecting the window surrounds?
No.
So far as you were aware, did RBKC Building Control ever see the work to the window surrounds as it progressed?
Yes, as Andy's statement, that they saw them on a regular basis, whether that be once or twice a week, and we would have been at both stages at any one day. So one day you'd have had the inner frames exposed, the second day you'd have seen the plastic on.
But I'm talking now not about the Clerk of Works, about RBKC Building Control officers or inspectors.
No, I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
So you can't help us as to whether or not Building Control did ever go in and see the window surrounds, including what was underneath and the UPVC?
No, I'm not even sure I'd known who it was from Building Control that came to site.
Yeah. Final topic now, complaints. If we can turn to RYD 30085892. This is an email from Emma Kelly at Ryden to Harley, copying in individuals at Ryden. And what's happened in this email is she's compiled a list of issues relating to a list of outstanding defects relating to the windows in this. Now, do you remember ever seeing this email or anything like it at the time?
No.
Now, if we look in the fourth line up from the bottom in the table on that page, there's a description there. It says on the left-hand side, gaps in the windows, 85 Grenfell Tower. And in the final line, drafty window. Were you ever made aware of complaints about gaps or drafts around the windows?
No, not to my knowledge. I'm assuming that refers to the actual window itself rather than the surround, but it's difficult to tell from the limited information you've got there.
So you weren't made aware of gaps or drafts around the window?
To our section of the works?
Yeah.
No, and again, one of the things we did, I think there might have been in the early stages, we might have noted that there was some cold air around that, so hence why everything was taped in. So if you look at any of the window surrounds, and when we foil taped it, and that would have acted as a vapour barrier or a better air seal.
Were you ever made aware that there were a number of complaints made by residents about the window surrounds after completion of the works?
If we would have rectified them, but I'm not aware that we ended up going back too many times to many flats.
Can we just look at one more document? This is IWS 401296. This is the witness statement of a lady called Mariam Yusuf Adam, who was a resident at flat 14 of Grenfell Tower. And if we can just look on page 4 at paragraph 20. she says this: "I further raised a concern with the polystyrene material that was being used on my ceilings and in between the window frames. I was told that this material was water resistant but flammable. I complained because this material retained heat and I was already too warm in my flat. I mentioned this in my statement to the MPS. No one addressed my concerns about the materials, and it turns out that my concerns were legitimate." Were you ever made aware of any concerns about the material being used around the side of the window? She's talking here about a polystyrene material used on the ceilings and in between the window frames.
No, we wasn't made specifically about anybody saying, a resident saying, this is not the way we want it done.
Right. Okay. Mr. Chairman, those are all my questions.
Right, thank you very much.
If we could just have a short break and then sweep up anything else.
How long do you think you might need for that purpose?
I wouldn't have thought any more than 10 minutes.
Right. Mr. Dixon, when Councillor got to the end of her questions, we need to have a short break to take stock and to see whether any questions need to be added, particularly from people who are watching from elsewhere. So we're going to have a short break now. We'll come back at 25 to 5 and we'll see if there are any more questions at that stage. All right? So would you like to go with the usher? And we'll come back then.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks. I'm
25
grateful.
to 5.
Thank you.
Yes, would you ask Mr. Dixon to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Dixon, well, we'll see if there are any more questions for you. Ms. Grange.
Yes, just one email chain I want to take Mr. Dixon to, in fairness to him. So if we can bring up RYD 55860, and I want to start by looking at the top of page 2. So I think you said in your evidence earlier on that you had responded to the problems that had been identified in flat 53. And if we look at the top of this email, I think this is where you come into the email chain and you say to Chris Holt and Andy Cole on the 29th of October 2015, if they are workmanship issues, then fine, but this is not as it has been explained. If the issues can be resolved with yourself in attendance, then all are aware of what has been agreed. My understanding is that this unit is not the same as all the others, hence the adaptation. Andy, can you confirm that the issues raised are down to poor finishing? So I think, as you explained earlier, you seem to be saying in this email that this was a rather unique flat with some special issues. And then if we can go one up to Mr. Holt's response, we can see there he says, "Hi Mark, same day, 29th October 2015. Thank you for your email. The way it looks to me, it is down to poor workmanship on this section of the property." And then he said, "In general, the standard is very good. If there is an issue fitting any materials, I normally go to the property and discuss with the operatives and agree with the resident that there's no other way to do it and ensure that the client will accept this. Please advise on the way forward." So I think, to be fair to you, he's saying it is down to poor workmanship, but he then says in brackets, "In general, the standard is very good." I just wanted to give you the opportunity to see that email chain since you'd asked before to be shown it. Is there anything more you want to say about that?
No.
No, thank you. Mr. Chairman, those are all my questions.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, Mr. Dixon, those are all the questions we have for you. Thank you very much for coming to give your evidence. It's been very useful to hear from you, and we're very grateful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now, of course, you're free to go.
Excellent. Okay.
Thank you very much. And that's it for the day, Miss Grange.
Yes, thank you. That's right. And tomorrow we have Mr. John Hoban and Mr. Millett will be back in this seat.
All right. Thank you very much. Before we go, I'd just like to say thank you to our transcriber, who I think has had a particularly challenging day. And I'd like you to know that we're very grateful for all your work. Thank you. Right.
Thank you.
We'll stop now. 10 o'clock tomorrow, please. Thank you.